You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have Brad Thor back on the show with me today. Brad is one of my favorite guests to have because he's one of my favorite authors. And, you know, I posted on Facebook a while back that there are a short list of books that are absolute must-buys as soon as they come out, whether I've read a blurb or not. And Brad Thor's Scot Harvath series is definitely at the top of that list. He's here to talk about his brand new book. It's called Near Dark. And is this book 19 or 20 in the series? Because Amazon is a little confused about it.
Yeah, no, that Amazon thing has been just a bear to wrestle and get correct. It's 19 in the series, my 20th thriller overall, because I did a spin-off book once called The Athena Project about an all-female Delta Force team. But for Harvath, this is the 19th. And for those who are listening who haven't read a Brad Thor book before, you do not have to have read a previous book. It's like James Bond movies. You can jump in at any point you want to, and I catch you up real quick without boring long-time readers. So you can start with Near Dark if you want to, the brand new one.
Absolutely. And you know, this really is and I know that there's a that you like to tell people they can jump in at any time. And I actually answered that question for someone on Facebook the other day. They said, well, I want to get started reading Brad Thor. Where do I start? And I said, well, just kind of read all the blurbs, and whichever story sounds good to you, jump in on that one, because you can kind of come in anyway. And I promise you'll love the hero and then want to go, you know, and kind of join him on all of his journeys. But there's reboot is the wrong word, but this is Harvath is going through some changes. And if someone has not read the other books, this is actually an opportune time to get in with him now and then go back and read that backstory. How do you feel about writing a character this long and you know, finding new stuff for him to get into?
Well, you know, that is the challenge when you write a series character, is revealing a little bit more about the character every time, and then also sending that character on adventures. Because what I sell is entertainment. I sell escape. So sure. I want to give you a great white knuckle thrill ride, hopefully like no one has ever given you before, show you some plots and plot twists that nobody else has done before. And that's what keeps my job challenging. And if it wasn't challenging, I'd get bored pretty fast. So it's hard. And each book gets harder. You would think, having written 20 novels, it would get easier, but it doesn't. That's part of the product of me being the son of a Marine and growing up in the Midwest. We were taught never rest on your laurels. You're lucky to have customers that are loyal to you. So what you need to do is exceed their expectations every single time. Be the one guy that your customers, basically my bosses, I don't work for Simon & Schuster. I work for you, Hank. I work for the readers. So I want, when you all go and leave X amount of stars at Amazon or Goodreads or Barnes & Noble, that's my annual performance review. And I want a 5-star performance review. So I spend the entire year working to make you happy.
Well, Brad, we've talked before, and I'll put links to the previous conversations we've had in the show notes where people can go catch up if they haven't listened to those yet. But we've talked in the past about your time as a television producer, writer, creator, and how that journey it eventually led to your novelist career that's happened since then. But do you remember, can you put your finger back on the first book, thriller that kind of opened your eyes to the fact that books could transform you, transport you to another place, and that you could live, entire adventures between the covers of a book? Do you remember the first book or series or author that did that for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I was a voracious reader from a very young age. So I read all the Hardy Boys books. I read all the Black Stallion books. I was really into horses when I was a kid. Go figure, growing up downtown Chicago, how I'd end up loving horses. But I remember the Count of Monte Cristo is really what I consider probably the most impactful and original cliffhanger page turner for me. And it was later in life that I learned that Alexandre Dumas had written that to be serialized in a French newspaper. So it was a marketing gimmick for a French newspaper that you would buy the next installment of the paper because you wanted to get the next chapter of the book. So he had to hold you for that chapter and then give you a cliffhanger, which would make you want to come back for the next one. So that was pretty impactful. But I was reading such great writers growing up. So David Morrell, who's just a fabulous, fabulous writer, who I've been fortunate enough to become friends with as an author. But Freddie Forsyth, Tom Clancy, John le Carré, all those people, because my parents read them. So when my parents would finish a book, I'd grab it and I'd read whatever they were reading. The Harold Robbins stuff, they wouldn't let me get my hands on. That was a little too risque. But the other stuff I did get to read, and that came a little bit, when I started getting towards my teen years a little bit more. I wasn't in second grade reading Ludlum, but later, getting eighth grade and into high school and stuff, I would devour those. I absolutely loved them. I wasn't a Sherlock Holmes person. My kids love Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle, but the espionage stuff, the international intrigue, I really grooved towards that. And that's probably had the biggest impact. That's become my favorite genre. That genre wasn't available to me as a grade schooler just because of what my parents would let me read. But when I got into high school, that really cemented it for me. And Stephen King, in his great book on writing, said that you should write what you love to read because that's where your passion is. And when I speak to young writers, I always add, and you also have a mini PhD in that genre. If you've read extensively in the thriller genre, you know what you like, what you don't like, why certain books by your favorite author really bowled you over, and maybe why one clunked for you, but the author got it back. You really understand tempo, pacing, page or chapter length, and all that kind of stuff if you read in one particular genre. And people do that. People love mystery, or they love sci-fi or fantasy. So that's really, there are very few authors that look at the book world and say, well, I think I could make a lot of money there. Most of them follow the Stephen King commandment, which is to write what you love to read.
Well, and you can always tell a rookie author because they're always scared of those questions. They're always, asking things like, well, how long should a chapter be? What,
Right.
How do I, tease out this scenario? And it really does come down to just trusting what your gut says and what you've trained yourself to do, and all that stuff. And when you complete one book, there's nothing like that feeling of completion.
Right.
And okay, now I know I can do it. Now let me go back and work on my craft. Did I do this correctly? And all of that just kind of works itself out after a while, doesn't it?
It's so true. I have always said that when I finished my very first novel, The Lions of Lucerne, I felt the elation that I figured people felt when they had climbed their first mountain or run their first marathon. It felt fantastic, Hank, and it feels great to finish a book ever since then. I've written 19 since then, and it always feels great. It never feels that great because that was the thing on my honeymoon. My wife asked me, what would you regret on your deathbed never having done? And I said, writing a novel and getting it published. And she said, fine, when we get home, 2 hours a day, protected time, make that dream come true. So I did that. And after I finished that first novel, I knew I would never go to my deathbed wondering what if. And I also knew I could do it again and again and again. And one of the things that I used to get asked to do early on in my writing career was somebody would say, oh, I'm thinking about writing a novel, or I have a friend who's thinking about writing a novel. Would you meet with them for coffee? And being a nice guy, I used to do it. And I quickly stopped. Because I realized that, just like you said, how long should a chapter be, all this kind of stuff, 99.9% of the people that say they want to write a novel will never write one. It
Right.
really is all about seat of pants to seat of chair. And Jack London said, you can't wait for inspiration. You have to go after it with a club. It was a waste of my time to go with people that were talking about writing books. Come to me after you have written the book, and then we can talk. But there's no point in talking beforehand. There is no magical formula. You just have to get the book out. You have to get it out, get it on the page, and worry about it later. And I think that is kind of a mental hurdle that if you can overcome that one, that's probably one of the biggest ones in the process, is just getting started. In fact, Lucille Ball once said that if you write a page a day, at the end of the year, you've got 365 pages. And it's kind of simple, but Mary Higgins Clark used to get up 2 hours early every morning before her family and just sit down and write. And there's another big, and I forget the gentleman's name, he's a British author, so prolific. The reason all the post boxes are painted red in Britain is because of this gentleman. He worked for the British Post, and he wrote, I don't know, like 200 books. It was crazy. But he'd get up every morning, write a little bit. If he finished a book, he'd start the next one before he went off to work. So it really is about self-discipline. It's more self-discipline than anything else, even more than creativity, I would suggest. It's self-discipline.
Want to grow as a writer and take your writing to the next level? Give Pro Writing Aid a try. Pro Writing Aid is a grammar checker, style editor, and writing mentor in one package. Pro Writing Aid will never replace a human editor. Rather, it helps you self-edit to a deeper level so that when you send it off to an editor, they will be able to focus on the meat of your writing and not spend their time fixing basic writing issues. Pro Writing Aid is the only platform that offers world-class grammar and style checking combined with more in-depth reports to help you strengthen your writing. Our unique combination of suggestions, articles, videos, and quizzes makes writing fun and interactive. Writing can be grammatically perfect but still feel awkward and clumsy. Pro Writing Aid searches out elements like repetitiveness, vague wording, sentence length variation, over-dependence on adverbs, passive voice, overcomplicated sentence structures, and so much more. Nothing makes a writer lose credibility faster than spelling and grammar mistakes. Submit clean, error-free writing. Go to ProWritingAid.com and use code HANK20 for 20% off of Pro Writing Aid Premium. Pro Writing Aid. Check it out today.
Looking back now, with this is book 19, and that's a huge accomplishment, but that's a lot of time that you have spent with Scot Harvath. I would imagine that you have friends in your life that have not been with you as long as Scot Harvath has been. Looking back now, is there any way that you could have guessed, when you were writing Lions of Lucerne, that Harvath would be with you as long as he has been?
It's a great question. And the answer is no. In fact, I was a huge Michael Crichton fan. And what I liked about Crichton and the way I saw my career as an author potentially going was every book would be a new protagonist,
Right.
unless I wrote multiple Jurassic Park style books. So I had never intended to come back to Harvath. Harvath was a one and done Lions of Lucerne because I wanted the excitement and the challenge and the freedom to create a different protagonist every time. Yet the response to Harvath was so good in my publishing house with the early readers and everything that my editor approached me and said, you have to continue. This is going to be a franchise character for you. You have to keep writing Harvath. People love this. You've developed such a great character. You need to keep coming back. And I said, well, I don't want to. I don't want to be tied to the same character. And she asked me a great question, my editor, and she said, well, how many series have you enjoyed reading? And I listed a bunch of people, a bunch of authors. And she said, okay, how many of those have you read the jacket, the storyline, or maybe the setting wouldn't have been your first choice if that had been a standalone book where you didn't know the character? And I said, well, probably several of them. And she said, but you went because you loved the character. You wanted another ride with that character. That character had become a good friend of yours and become part of your life, someone you enjoyed spending time with. And I said, of course. She said, well, that's exactly what Harvath is becoming for people. And it's why you need to keep writing him. So it was with the encouragement of my editor that Harvath became my series, my franchise character. If not for that, I don't know that there ever would have been another Scot Harvath adventure after Lions of Lucerne.
That's incredible. We've talked before, Brad, about about how you have a tendency to write books. You actively kind of avoided trying to tackle things that are newsworthy, top of mind for a lot of people. But for some reason, when you publish a book, they tend to line up with world events sometimes. And I could rattle off any number of your books that, it seems like Brad Thor is prescient and can see things coming before they happen. But do you attribute that to anything? And this is kind of tongue in cheek. I know you can't plan these things, but they do kind of have a way of things mattering when the book comes out.
Well, it's funny because instead of saying I'm psychic, my wife says I'm psycho, which is kind of funny because it's oftentimes bad things that I've seen that come true. Sometimes some good things, sometimes some interesting international events, things like that. It is. I got to tell you, Hank, I'm a voracious consumer of news. And Stephen King once said that a writer is someone who's trained their mind to misbehave. And that's very much my situation, although I don't know that I've trained my mind to misbehave. I think it's just wired that way, that I look at things and say, what if? And I try to connect dots. This is one of the reasons that I was asked to participate in the analytic red cell unit in Washington, D.C., to try to help predict for the U.S. government what the next terrorist attack might look like, where it might come from, where Americans might be vulnerable at home and abroad. So as the son of a Marine, it was an incredible honor to be asked to serve my country, not by picking up a rifle the way my father did, but to use my creativity. So it's just a way that I do these things. And there's certain things that I avoid. Like I've never written about bin Laden because I knew eventually he'd be caught or captured, caught or captured or killed, I should say. So there are certain things I don't touch, but there are certain things where there's a reading of the tea leaves and I've got a certain idea that things might happen. And when they do, it's a combination of having had enough information that I think anybody, if they saw the world through the lens that I did, could have seen this as a potential outcome. But there's a certain element of luck in there too. So when things do come true, whether the novel's been out a week or a year, and then all of a sudden something happens, that's great. But the key for me is to keep the novels evergreen. So let's say you want to go back and read one of mine, or you're at a vacation rental and there's a bunch of books on the shelf and you're like, oh, I've heard of this Brad Thor guy. Let me grab this paperback down and read it. It still feels like it could happen tomorrow, right on your doorstep. So that being evergreen of every single novel standing the test of time is really, really tough. And if I beat the headlines as part of that, that's icing on the cake.
What's interesting is there are things that happen like that, but then there are things that happen like 2020. I don't know if you've noticed, Brad, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, a worldwide occurrence, and I've talked to a lot of authors, and what's going to be interesting is to see what kinds of stories come out next year, because we know that with the way the publishing world works, this book, Near Dark, has probably been off of your desk for about a year. You go through the editing process and then all of the things that happen to bring a book to market. But this book is what you worked on a year or two ago, and now you're probably working on another book. But how do you feel, and you can answer this personally if you want, or if you just want to kind of prognosticate about the industry, but how do you feel that this thing that we're going through is going to maybe change the face of the stories that come out later down the road?
Well, I'll give you a two-part answer to that. Number one, in my thriller Blowback, I did a bioterror thing, what I thought was a really clever bioterror thing. I talked about Hannibal crossing the Alps to go invade Rome, the Roman Empire, and he lost a bioweapon. And that bioweapon gets rediscovered in a melting alpine glacier, and now it's going to be set loose on the world. That was Blowback. And then Code of Conduct, I did the intentional release of a terrible virus. And the Code of Conduct starts out on page one that the president had been rushed to Bethesda Naval Hospital, and people were freaking out because if the president could get the virus, that meant no one was safe. And that's how I kicked off Code of Conduct. So I've dealt with a bioterrorism thing. I've dealt with a virus thing in ways that I thought were very novel, very creative. As far as COVID's concerned, I think it's probably the worst thing you could do to include COVID in a thriller going forward. I think it's
Sure.
an absolutely bad idea, and I'll tell you why. Number one, it could burn out, or we could get a vaccine tomorrow. All right. It's again exactly why I did not write about bin Laden, because I knew eventually he'd be captured or killed. It is so silly to do that, in my professional opinion. I wouldn't touch COVID with a 10-foot pole. The second reason on COVID is I'm selling entertainment. I'm selling escape. I want to give you a break from COVID. So I don't want you to be thinking about COVID. It's bombarding you all day long. Pick up a Brad Thor book and escape for a little bit. And I'll actually add a third thing on there, which is if you're trying to escape from COVID, and if COVID is potentially not going to be there, the third thing for me as an author is I really don't want to read spy international thrillers where people are wearing how the heck are you going to have two spies meet if both of them are wearing masks? They have to stand 6 feet apart. How are you going to have the meeting in a cafe in Paris or Vienna or Brussels? How are you going to do a brush pass if you're supposed to socially distance? It just, to me, I don't want to read about that world. I want to read about the world as I knew it before COVID, because I think very quickly, think about the Spanish influenza. What happened right after that? The roaring 20s. As soon as we beat COVID, oh my God, Hank, the world is going to party like it's nobody's business. I can't wait for it. I grew up, seeing things and reading stuff about the 20s. I think we're gonna make the 20s pale in comparison with what's going to happen next. And I don't think anybody's going to want to remember COVID. In fact, I've read a couple of articles that talk about the Spanish flu from the pandemic in 1918, 1919, and how there are very little personal accounts because people didn't treat each other very well. It was a very rough time, and people wanted to forget it. I don't want to write a book that people want to forget. And I think people are going to want to put COVID as far in their rearview mirrors as they can. So if there's any writers listening to this, and I know there's a lot of them, I would think twice before doing something about COVID. Seriously.
I think that's great advice. I don't know if you've also noticed, but it's an election year here in the United States, 2020. I know,
God,
because
you are that damn paper boy. If it's not in the bushes, it's up on the roof. I am missing out on everything.
If it's not pandemic news that we're being inundated with, it's political news. There are some writers who, when you read their books, it's just right on their sleeve. You know exactly where they stand on everything. You are a writer who, on social media and stuff, you don't shy away from your beliefs and where you stand on certain issues, or which candidate that you like more than the others. But when I open one of your thrillers, I'm not inundated with your personal beliefs or your opinion about everything. You have a way of painting characters that's just the least of what I'm thinking about. I don't bring that stuff into the book with me, whereas some other authors, are just fine to do that. They want you to bring in all of your political beliefs and prejudices and for lack of a better word, and they kind of play off of that. Do you have any feelings when you sit down as a writer? Do you turn off those things, or how do you approach kind of what your real world feelings are about politics and things like that, as opposed to Brad Thor, the writer?
Well, so thank you. It's a very nice observation, and I will actually clarify that with the onset of the pandemic, I have stopped. I was one of those people that complained to Hollywood, "Shut up and sing." Right? I don't want to know your politics and all that kind of stuff. Politics is my baseball. I follow it very closely. I've worked on campaigns and everything, but I've stopped putting my politics on social media. With the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, I got very frustrated. I have, a very dear friend of mine is the national security advisor to the current administration, and I've just been frustrated, and it's gotten more divisive. And so I decided, okay, it was really hypocritical of me to say, "Shut up and sing" to Hollywood, yet I'm an entertainer also, and I should be allowed to just, promote my politics on social media. I realized that was very hypocritical. So I have stopped doing that. You can go back and look at my social media. I'm not doing it anymore. I just don't do it. Particularly now, it's so tough. It's so divisive. And it was not only divisive within political parties, but it's been things have become divisive culturally. And so now we're seeing, there was I just read a headline last week about the 2 Texas officers that were ambushed and killed. And one of the officers' daughters put out a social media post, and she used a hashtag that was supportive of police officers, and she was absolutely hounded. I just could not believe that people would hound this poor girl whose father was murdered over her. It was just terrible. So I saw somebody say right about the time the pandemic started that Twitter in particular was like giving the dumbest person you could find a bullhorn. And I thought that was right on the money. And I asked somebody very close to me who's very smart, who does not do social media, why don't you do social media? And he said to me, he said, Brad, he said, particularly on Twitter, he said, it is like the fight or flight mechanism gets triggered when you post because you're going to get challenged. He said, but the fight never ends. There's always somebody else that's criticizing. And he said, and your cortisol's getting up. He said, it's just not, life's too short. It's not worth it. So I backed off that because I thought, okay, my author work should be separate from me, the citizen. And as the son of a Marine, my parents very much valued being stewards of the Republic. The politicians don't own the country. We own the country. And it's a company, and we don't even own it. We're merely managers, you and me, Hank, and everyone listening. We're merely stewards of the Republic, and it's our job to hand it to the next generation freer, more equitable, safer, more prosperous than it was handed to us. I took my role as a citizen very, very seriously. And so it was Brad Thor as citizen that you were seeing on social media. And I've now dialed that back because it's just a really tough time. And my role, I can better serve my country and the people who follow me by entertaining them. So to the writing end of things, I've always wanted to write books that everyone could enjoy. I always said it would be a huge mistake to open a restaurant and hang a sign on the front door that said, everyone welcome except for these groups, bing, bang, boom. That would be silly. You'd be cutting off your nose to spite your face. So I want the books to be accessible to everyone. And I write thrillers that involve politics. The politics are in there. So I don't write the politics to take shots at either side. I write the politics to show the difficulties that the men and women on the front lines face, because they are often hamstrung, whether it's by management at the CIA, whether it's decisions made in the Pentagon, whether it's congressional things that happen in oversight committees. I try to honestly reflect that. And I grew up downtown Chicago. I have Democratic friends. I have Republican friends. So I want them all to read and enjoy the books. It's one of the reasons also I have incredibly brilliant women that surround me, whether it's my agent, my wife, my editor. Actually, hold on, got to start the right way. Whether it's my wife, my daughter, my editor, my agent, I got to rank them properly. And so the female characters in my books are not window dressing. They are meant to be equal drivers of the plot, equally necessary for the plot for the ends of the book to come to fruition. This stuff is really important to me. So I want to write a book that, regardless of what your background is, I want everybody to enjoy these books. I've always said that reading is a shared love. It's a shared language that we can all speak to each other. If we love books, it doesn't matter what your bank account looks like, who you voted for, where you grew up, what you look like, where you go to worship, what you do for a living. None of that should matter. And I feel that books are the one place that everybody should feel it is accessible to them. I don't want anybody to say, well, I wouldn't read that Brad Thor guy's books because he takes positions that I don't like. There may be characters that take some positions that you don't like, but I try to balance those with other characters that show the other side, because I believe most people are inherently good. Even the villains in my book believe they're the heroes in their own story. There's a reason they're doing things. The villains may not be good, but it isn't kind of a cardboard cutout, Dr. Evil, pinky between the teeth and or the twisting of the mustache, if you will.
Well, and that's fun, isn't it? Getting to look. To take a certain situation, look at it from both sides. You know which side Harvath is going to take, but what would someone else do? And then what are the consequences of those decisions or that worldview? And that's how you write a great antagonist, isn't it?
I think so. In fact, there's somebody who works in my office that Code of Conduct, which we were just talking about, is one of her favorite books, particularly because she loves the villain in that book, Pierre Damien, who is this is going to sound really heavy. And for all of you listening, this is the book I want you to take to the beach or to the lake, take on vacation. That's the kind of book I write. So when I say what Pierre Damien is, don't let the term, if you're unfamiliar with it, scare you off, because it's not. It's a spooky, kind of cultish, clubby, weird globalist kind of a thing, but they're called neo-Malthusians, and they believe that there's too many people on the earth and it would be really good if something swept through and wiped them all out. And this guy is very, very interesting. And as I layered that onion, this lady that works in my office, she said, hands down, my favorite villain of yours. Hands down. She loves Pierre Damien and Code of Conduct. And it's because of the way that I layered him and how I went into what his motivations were and why he thought, even though we as the readers see him as the bad guy, he saw himself as the hero of his own story. And so that makes me feel really good when people say, gosh, I found your bad guys compelling. Because one of the worst reviews you could get as an author is for someone, A, to say I didn't finish your book, or B, to say that the characters were two-dimensional. They were cardboard. And so oftentimes I'll start with the villain, and I'll really take a good look at the villain. Once I know what the book's going to be about, I want to know what drives the villain and why do they feel they're correct in doing it. Because it isn't just Snidely Whiplash, again, twisting the mustache and tying the damsel in distress to the railroad tracks. Nobody believes that. You want characters where you can understand them. And this goes back, Hank, to when I was at the University of Southern California studying creative writing and film and television production. We had a writing class, and we watched a movie with Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman, real old movie now, called Kramer versus Kramer, about two parents getting divorced and kind of the fight over the child in that. And the teacher asked a very interesting question, which is, okay, there's a hero and there's a villain in this movie. Which is which? And everybody had a different opinion. Who was the hero? Who was the villain? And okay. And they could argue either Meryl Streep was or Dustin Hoffman was, but there was a little bit of both in each of them. So I think the more human you can make characters, the more people can relate to them. That makes them more compelling. That makes the read more engaging.
Noveler is the best way to write a novel. Why? Quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Noveler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Noveler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing, from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Noveler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by Pro Writing Aid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Noveler for a whole year, and it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Noveler, Novlr. That's noveler.org. Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community.
Do you generally have a problem when you begin the planning of a new book? Is there a problem that you're kind of wrestling with, or maybe it's an intriguing news article, or or maybe just seeing something in the geopolitical landscape and wondering, I wonder, if this certain situation went sideways, what would happen? Like, what's that first kind of kernel of an idea that you start rolling around and wrestling with in your mind that the story comes out of?
So that's a great question. So like I said earlier, I look at things and say, what if? So that whole Stephen King, writer, someone who's trained their mind to misbehave. For me, I look at everything and say, what if? So my third novel, State of the Union, it was an idea where I said to myself, what if the Cold War really didn't end the way we thought it did? What if the Soviets had just rolled over and played dead? What if it was a long con, if you will, a long game where they said, we can't beat the US right now. What happens if we just pretend to give up? And they project that they're going to get all this international aid and they'll pretend to decommission X amount of nukes and all this kind of stuff. It was really compelling. I thought, okay, that'd be a cool idea for a thriller. The idea for my novel Takedown. I was in New York. I had a nugget of an idea. I was going to be meeting with my editor to pitch a new novel. And my wife and I checked into the hotel and went downstairs to the hotel bar to have a drink. And I was sitting there and I said, Manhattan's an island. What if all the bridges and tunnels got taken out? Why might somebody want to do that? And that what if gave birth to blowback. So a lot of my ideas happen that way. And two books ago, Spy Master, I had seen we'd been in Afghanistan a super long time. We'd been in Iraq a super long time. And we're a war-weary nation. We've been at war a long, long time. And there was a lot going on with NATO, with the current administration, and were NATO members, honoring their obligation to put 2% of their GDP into their own militaries, and many weren't. And I thought, okay, this is really interesting because we're signers to the NATO Charter, and Article 5 says an attack on one is an attack on all. Well, we know Putin took over the Crimean Peninsula, and he's got his sights set on reconstituting kind of the old Russia. So there are 3 NATO member states you don't hear a lot about. They're very small. They're on the Baltic, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Well, if Russia moved against one of those, would a war-weary American public be willing to send its sons and daughters to capture that back from Russia, particularly when most Americans can't find those places on a map? If you gave them a map without the country's name, would they be willing to go into one of these places? Maybe some of them hadn't even heard of before. And I thought, ooh, boy, that's a difficult thing. Okay, now take President Trump and his current administration out of it. What if you did have a president who was pro-NATO or reluctant with NATO, who saw that this could be a big problem and knew that there wouldn't be public support? What would you be willing to do to prevent that war? Because Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, has only been triggered once, and the United States triggered it after 9/11. So what if Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia said, oh my gosh, Russia's attacking us? Would we be willing to go? And as I dug into that, I found out that the Rand Corporation did a war game scenario where they ran the simulation hundreds of times, probably 1,000 times, with very high-end U.S. generals, some playing the role of Russian generals, some playing U.S. generals, and then they would mix them up and switch sides with them. Every single time Russia got away with it. And I thought, oh, this would be a perfect thriller. What might the United States do if it got a little bit of intel that Russia was about to go? What would the United States be willing to allow Scot Harvath, my protagonist, to do to prevent that Article 5 being triggered, Russia being able to grab one of these NATO states? Because if Russia did grab one of these states and we did nothing, it's the end of NATO. So how do you preserve NATO and not go to war? And so that was kind of my thriller. So Harvath got set loose in this part of the world that I'd never set a novel in before. And the more I read about it, the more I realized, oh, the Russians have their eyes set on this little island off the coast of Sweden, because if they could put missiles there, you don't get into the Baltic Sea with American ships. You can't fly planes there because the Russians' air defense systems will take you out. And the most fascinating piece of information I got was that trying to move American military equipment out of Germany or Poland up into the Baltic states, the railroad gauge changes. And we have to take everything off of train cars and put them on new train cars. And every one of those switching depots is already mapped out by the Russians for sabotage. So there's all of these roadblocks on why it should not work for the United States. So as a thriller author, to say, how do we make it work? How do we actually get away with this before Russia can get it? Was just too much fun. So it was really neat to kind of refresh like the Cold War era thriller and set it in a modern day setting with real life stakes.
I love that so much. Brad, as you're talking about things that you found out as you started digging into the scenario, with Near Dark, book 19 in the Scot Harvath series, has your research or your ability to research changed over these 19 books? I can only imagine that it has, because I would imagine you could pick up the phone, and being Brad Thor, you could probably find out things that might be a little more difficult for me. How has your research changed, and is it still as much fun to dig into things you don't know about and start peeling the layers back?
Yeah, the research has not changed. It's still very much the way it was at the beginning, which is me building relationships. So I want to take readers right up to the edge of the real world and let them peer over the hedge. This is the real stuff that the SEAL teams face, or Delta Force, or people at the CIA, NSA, DIA, FBI, inside the White House. I really want to show you the way these things operate. But at the same time, my job is to keep those pages flipping by really fast. Because again, I want to give you an escape. I want to entertain you. I want you to have a fun read. You can read over the weekend. In some cases, people read the books without even moving, one sitting, which is a huge compliment. So my goal is to get the best information I can get and then make it as entertaining as possible. Now, I'll have, people at the CIA say, okay, well, you would do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, okay. And I take all the notes and everything. And then they read the book and they're like, Thor, we told you there'd be 8 meetings before your hero can get from here to there. I said, yeah, but nobody's going to sit through 8 cutouts. Nobody's going to take 12 taxi cab rides, 3 buses, 2. I get it. I'm not writing a training manual to be used at the farm for new CIA recruits. So that's not what this is. I'm writing fiction. So part of writing fiction, I could paraphrase, but I'm not going to. I'm going to give you the Elmore Leonard quote that he always gave young writers, which is, leave out the parts that people skip, right? I'm a big Clancy fan. I loved Clancy growing up, but my dad swore, this was my dad's joke, that Clancy got paid by the word, because you'd have these long passages of how a guidance system on a certain type of missile works. I don't care. All I want to know is there's 2 guys on the ground that have a laser designator, and they can paint a target. And, nobody else can see this laser except for the missile comes in and the missile hits the target based on where these guys were painting. I don't need to know that the gyroscope rotates this way, blah, 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 inside that. I don't care. That was the stuff that I always skipped in the Clancy novels. I'm not that, I don't need that much technology. So in my own novels, I don't put a lot of that stuff in. Like, I'll describe what a weapon looks like. I'll give you the full name of the weapon. And what's kind of neat is my favorite class of fan mail that I get is when I hear from men and women in the SEAL teams, the FBI, CIA, so on and so forth, that say, wow, you nailed it. That's the gear we carry, or that's tactically some of the stuff that we've been doing currently, or blah, blah, blah. Those are the same situations, problems we had in this area of the world, same kind of craziness back at the office that was going on. That to me is a real compliment. So that's the balance I have to strike as a thriller writer is, again, I'm not a teacher. These are not instructional manuals. These are thrillers. So you have to decide what parts to leave out, what parts to keep in. And that sometimes can be really, really hard, because there's a lot of fun stuff I want to include. But if it slows down the pacing, you have to be willing to yank it out and leave it aside.
Brad, in my imagination, a couple of years ago, you woke up one morning just pissed off at Scot Harvath and just decided to make his life a living hell. And the last couple of books have kind of borne that out. Um, with Near Dark, we see a Harvath that is he's at the end of his rope. He's in worse shape than we've ever seen him before. There's a discussion that I like to have with people that write long series, like Scot Harvath. When we pick up a book, I'm not worried that you're going to kill Scot Harvath because I'm assuming that there's going to be a book 20 in this series. So you as a writer are given a unique challenge that you have to set the stakes really high, but also have him show up for book 20. So as a writer, what do you get to do to Scott to keep those stakes high, to keep me on the edge of my seat, wondering what's going to happen, but preserve him? That's a unique situation to be in.
Yeah, and it's tough, and it's interesting because so the book we were just talking about with all the NATO stuff and Russia moving on a Baltic potentially, that was 2 books ago, Spy Master. And I wrote Spy Master and I turned it in to my agent, to my agent and my editor. And my editor got back to me and said, yeah, I want to do something else with the ending. I said, okay, what do you want to do? And she said, I don't know. But she's great at telling me, we need something else here. And I'll say, what is it? I don't know. You figure it out. You're the writer. I'm the editor. You're the writer. You figure it out. So I ended Spy Master with a cliffhanger. And what was really tough was then I had to start writing the next book, Backlash. So I had to address what about that cliffhanger? What does that mean? And it looked like that Russell Crowe movie, A Beautiful Mind. I had all these things taped to my wall. I looked like I was having a nervous breakdown, a mental break, because I had all these charts and Post-it notes and all this kind of stuff in my office, trying to figure out what direction made the most sense. And I said, okay, what direction will be the hardest for me as a writer? What bears the most risk? What will be the biggest risk I can take with my readers and professional risk that I could take as an author? And what scares me the most? And that was the direction I went, because I realized that the harder I pushed myself, the more rewarding the final product was going to be, again, for the readers, who are the people I work for. And so that took me to Backlash. And then from Backlash, what's really interesting is this whole thing about the bonus chapter that I did for Barnes & Noble, where Backlash was complete. Barnes & Noble said, hey, will you do a bonus chapter for us so we could have a special edition? And so it's kind of like the Marvel world, the movie, the Marvel series. If you do anything, even if it's after the credits and that scene pops up and you were smart enough to sit in the theater knowing it's a Marvel movie and you should wait for that final scene, that final scene, that additional chapter I wrote, becomes part of the Harvath universe. So when I did that for Backlash, I didn't think ahead. I didn't realize I was going to have to address that in Near Dark. So it was really tough for me, because I basically said, oh my God, I talked to my publicist and I said, David, Backlash is complete. Now I got to do this bonus chapter. And he goes, well, it's a Brad Thor novel. Every chapter that needed to be in Backlash last summer was in there. There is no bonus to that. He said, it's got to be something brand new. And I was like, oh, you know what? You're probably right. And I came up with this idea of somebody putting out, you fade to black, you come back up from black, and somebody is putting out $100 million bounty on Scot Harvath. Okay, great. My editor loved it, said it was the best chapter she'd ever read. The people at Barnes & Noble loved it. So I put that out there. But then that had to become the starting point, Hank, for Near Dark. And it's the prologue in Near Dark. It's that same chapter that sets that up. But what really became difficult for me as a writer is I know who Harvath is because I know who he's based on. So I picked up the phone and called the handful of people that Harvath's based on and said, if you found out somebody put a $100 million contract out on you, what would you do? And the first spook I talked to said, the only way to kill a contract is to kill the person who put the contract out on you. So you're going to have to figure that out. And I said, well, if somebody puts a $100 million bounty on you, how do they find you? And he said, they don't. He said, if I want to disappear, I disappear. And he said, here's potential places I would hide out. Here's how I would reverse engineer it. So that was really tough for me because it wasn't like the assassins would pour in and Harvath could grab one and interrogate him. That just seemed too easy. Again, I wanted to set that bar high for myself. So that was the big challenge with doing this next one. And so you do find Harvath down. And I mean, Backlash was really difficult for Harvath because last summer's book, because of how I ended Spymaster and how I decided that cliffhanger would be resolved in Backlash. So this year with Near Dark, you find him at the lowest point he's ever been in any of my novels. So that's really tough in that it reveals something about Harvath even more. I think it makes him more human, more compelling, more relatable for readers. But now the challenge for me is, where do I go next for next summer's book? And I can't wait till you and I do this interview next year because I'll have the book under my belt. It'll be complete and I'll feel great. Like, hey, Hank, remember I couldn't tell you where we were going to go? It's really tough. But the same person, brilliant woman who works in my office who loves the villain from Code of Conduct, has likened what I do to having an amusement park. And she said, you get so obsessed, Brad, with topping yourself every year, but you've got to understand that that's not necessarily how every reader looks at your books. Readers will have favorites, but they don't necessarily say, okay, well, I like this one because he topped it. I like this one for whatever reason. She said, your business is almost like you have an amusement park. And what people want is they want to come back every year. They want to know that they're going to get an awesome ride and they get to take the ride with Scot Harvath. So everybody around me believes that I put more pressure on myself than is necessary. But again, it goes back to my Midwestern upbringing, not taking the readers for granted and wanting to top myself every year. But this idea that what I need to do is build a great ride, give people a great thrill, that's what they're coming to me for, is something that I need to embrace a little bit closer. But I just drive myself very, very hard. And it's so important to me that readers know listen, you and I can both go out and make an extra $25, right? To buy a new book, whatever it is you spend on a hardcover or an ebook or an audio book. You can go out and make more money to replace what you spent. The one thing you cannot make more of is your time. And that's what is the most valuable to me as an author. So when you give me your time to read or listen to one of my books, I feel it's incumbent upon me to deliver that much, if not more, value back to you. And that's what that's where I set the bar for myself. And that's why I inch it up every year, is because it forces me to work on my craft, get better. And I know for sure, listen, I'm never going to phone it in. I am going to be the one guy that you can come to year after year after year when I have a new book out. And Thor is never going to let me down. Because I quit before I'd phone it in. It's just not within my DNA to phone it in. I can't. It's not fair. And I don't want the criticism too. That's one thing that, you never want to hear a reviewer say, oh, you really dropped the ball. That's why this stuff, like last year, the book won several awards and best book of the year and all this kind of stuff. And people going, I don't know how he's going to top himself. And then now I'm getting reviews for Near Dark and already hearing from readers now that the book has been out, like, what are we, 24 hours now, going, oh my God, I read it in one sitting and it's even better than last year. So now the pressure's on even more. How do I make next summer's book even better? I'm gonna have no teeth and no hair. I'm gonna pull everything out.
That's amazing. And we all know that, from the writer's perspective, whereas the readers may not feel like that you're topping each one like you do, but that you can't do the same things that you did last time. You've got to keep recreating your storytelling to keep people like me with the new Thor book at the top of the must buy list, because I know unlike some other authors who I have loved throughout their career, but you can see when they've sold so many books and you get a new one and you're like, man, I don't like to say that they phoned this one in, but it kind of feels that way. You never get that feeling from a Brad Thor book. And I think that's what people love about you and your work.
But I try. I mean, it's like saying they're handcrafted. I mean, it's kind of a stupid thing, but it is that kind of, it's not an assembly line. There's not a formula. There's no formula to my books. And I really, when people leave comments on Goodreads or Amazon or whatever, I read that stuff. That's free feedback for me. That's market research. I know a lot of authors, I never look. Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to hear what your boss thinks of your work product? Of
Right.
course you should read those things. I mean, yeah, I mean, you got to let there's some people like I'll get a bad review for whatever reason. Like some guy said, for a former military guy who also was an arms dealer. I'm like, what? I wasn't in the military and I was never an arms dealer. You got me confused with somebody else, buddy. And some of these people you can click and see all they do is come on to unload and just vent their spleens, right? They're just basically unhappy people. And it is the Abraham Lincoln. You can make some of the people happy some of the time, but you can't make all the people happy all the time. But I do try. And I think it's a testament to having readers come back and reviewers like you being so kind to say that I'm on your must-buy list and that I should be on other people's must-buy list. I have to earn that every single year. When people say, what's your favorite book, Brad, that you've written? I say it's the one I'm working on now because it's the one I'm most excited about. It's the one I'm most passionate about because I've worked so hard to come up with a story to try and be better than last year, to deliver for my bosses. That's the one I'm most excited about. So that for me is always my goal, again, because I want to be the one you can always count on. Thor's going to find another way to people plan their vacations around my books. How about that for feeling a responsibility? Somebody says,
Right.
okay, I look at when your book's coming out and then I plan my vacation so I can read it on vacation. Holy crap, you want to ruin somebody's vacation? They planned it around your book? What kind of jerk doesn't want to make sure it's the best vacation ever?
Well, we know that midsummer there's going to be a new Brad Thor book, and usually there's a bit of a book tour that comes after that. Well, 2020 has kind of changed those things up. What are you doing for book promotion this year besides podcast and stuff like that? But normally you're out hitting the road. What's it like this summer?
Well, this summer it's different. So Monday evening before the book officially came out, we did a virtual event at Poison Pen in Scottsdale. Barbara Peters, who's absolutely just fantastic, the owner there. I love Barbara, so smart. She's had huge success. I mean, she had a Diana Gabaldon thing, and they sold like 1,000 books. I mean, these virtual book events, Hank, are going through the roof. And when you think about it, it makes sense. I can get hundreds of people to show up at a Brad Thor book signing. But if I do, those are people that are willing to get in their cars, drive, sit through an hour kind of interview with me and a host. And then I take questions and then another several hours maybe before you can even get up to get your book signed to get a photo. Now, though, you can do it from home, and people that might not have wanted to get into their cars or said, you know what, I've heard about this Brad Thor guy, but I've never gone to one of his signings. You know what, I'll click on this link and watch. So this so far, and I could do a bunch in one day, which is what I did yesterday when the book pubbed. So our hope is that we're going to actually reach even more people, that this will actually be a benefit. And with all of kind of the slowing and rolling back of phases because of the spikes in COVID and stuff, we found a lot of people are sick of the news. They've watched pretty much everything they're going to watch on TV and Netflix. And there is this wonderful new tidal wave of readers coming back in saying, I just want to escape. Oh, I heard this Thor guy is pretty darn good when it comes to escapes. I'm going to give him a try. So these virtual events are something new for us, but they allow us to potentially reach more people. So it's early in the game. Like I said, I just started 2 nights ago on Monday night. So it's something I'm not I don't have all the feedback yet, although what we've gotten so far, it's been awesome. It's really been awesome. It's actually outpacing what we thought it would do. So it may turn out that this is just a great thing to incorporate along with, because there's no substitute for seeing people in person.
Sure.
And being able to shake hands and hug your fans and get photos with everybody. I'm looking forward to that part coming back. But the way we're doing it right now, knock on wood, it continues to work as well as it's going because it's exceeding all expectations. It's fantastic.
Well, what's interesting is we've heard stories of businesses that, have gone to people working from home and virtual offices, and people realizing that, maybe we should have been doing some of this all along because it's actually more efficient. And I'll be interested to see, a year or two down the road, when all this COVID stuff is over and life begins to get back to normal, how much of the things that we've done that stick with us because, we realize, hey, that's maybe a good thing that we can incorporate.
Well, I'll tell you, I can be in a lot more places in one day. Because it used to be you do an event at night, I'd get up at dark 30, be on the first thing smoking in the morning to get to another town to do morning TV or drive time radio, and then have an event that night. And it really is a grind. It's a good grind. I like it, but I can only go to one event a day versus now I can do multiple events a day. And the nice thing is, and I've got them all up at bradthor.com for anybody who's interested in seeing one of the events or a couple of the events. What we're doing is supporting all these different venues, right? So you can choose, you can look at all the events and say, oh yeah, you know what, I like that store, or that's a library in my town, and I'm gonna do that one. I'm gonna support that one. I'm gonna sign up to watch that event, and that's kind of neat. So we like that. We're able to reach more people, support more bookstores than we would have normally, which is great because they're hurting too, because people are not walking in the doors and just browsing, right? That's a big part of everyday life, is going in your bookstore and trying to find a new book and all that kind of stuff. So I like that doing things virtually, I'm able to help more bookstores and libraries. So that's kind of a neat thing.
The new book, Near Dark, the 19th Scot Harvath Series book, is out, available everywhere now. In the show notes of this episode, you'll find links where you can buy the Kindle edition or order a hardback, or my favorite way to consume books now, and especially Brad Thor books, are audiobooks, and we put a link there as well. Grab it today. Head out on your vacation. Take Brad Thor with you. Brad, as always, this has been so much fun catching up and talking about the new book and all the great stuff that we did. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Hank, my pleasure. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep reading.
World Anvil is a browser-based world-building platform designed for all world builders, writers and novelists, dungeon masters, game developers, and everyone else. World Anvil keeps your world setting safe and organized, helps you find your characters, locations, plots, timelines, and maps quickly and easily as you write. Then, if you choose, you can showcase your amazing world building to the world, beautifully and interactively, to keep your readers engaged. You can even use our professional tier to build your career selling access to behind-the-scenes content your readers will love and growing your community. Build your world setting in any genre with over 25 custom-built world-building templates, complete with prompts to inspire your creativity. Allow your readers to explore the public parts of your world in an innovative new way with interactive maps, timelines, and wiki-style articles. Give special access to co-authors, beta readers, customers, or patrons to see exclusive behind-the-scenes content. There's a free version to get started with all of the major features. Guild membership offers you a host of extra options, including comprehensive privacy settings, co-authors, presentation options, and so much more. Join our community of over 250,000 world builders, including professional authors. Take part in competitions and learn more about world building at this fantastic online community. Use the coupon code HANK to get 20% off all 6 and 12-month subscriptions. WorldAnvil.com. I'm a recent convert, and I know you will be too.